There has been much talk about Katharine Hepburn's scandalous private life, but among all the rumored affairs, there was one lover who sparked more controversy than all the rest: the married director John Ford. It is believed that the two shared a secret, long-lasting, and emotionally turbulent relationship. In the final days of Ford's life, Hepburn went to visit him at his bedside. Their conversation at the time was being recorded. Assuming the tape had stopped and that they were alone, Hepburn and Ford continued speaking without restraint. In that moment, they unknowingly revealed painful details, exposing a dark and complicated chapter of their shared history that both had tried to keep buried. Hepburn's story cannot be separated from her childhood in the early 20th century. She was raised in an extraordinarily progressive household. Her mother was a member of the Connecticut Women's Suffrage Association and often took young Katharine along to political demonstrations. To society at the time, her parents were seen as unconventional, even shocking, but that was only the beginning. From a very young age, Hepburn hated being a girl. She felt more like a boy, cut her hair short, and insisted that everyone call her Jimmy. Rather than punishing or forcing her to change, her parents fully supported, respected, and encouraged her tomboy nature. That unconditional acceptance allowed Hepburn to live as her true self and gradually shaped the strong, unconventional personality that would later define the Katharine Hepburn legend, while also ensuring that her private life remained surrounded by controversy and fascination. She grew into a young woman who seemed destined for greatness. Katharine Hepburn became an accomplished golfer, but more importantly, she began to explore her growing fascination with movies. Her childhood was lively, warm, and full of charm. On the surface, everything appeared ideal. Yet she had no idea that her life was about to take a devastatingly dark turn. When she was just 13 years old, Katharine and her older brother, Tom, traveled to New York during Easter break to stay with their aunt. The siblings appeared carefree and happy, enjoying an evening at the theater together. But the very next morning, Hepburn stumbled upon something so shocking it would follow her for the rest of her life. She discovered the body of her beloved 15-year-old brother, dead under circumstances that strongly suggested he had taken his own life. The loss shattered her. Yet what followed was perhaps even more unsettling. Her family's response was one of cold denial. They refused to accept that Tom had ended his own life, insisting instead that his death must have been the result of a failed experiment. That refusal to confront the truth spread through the family like a quiet illness. For Katharine, the impact was profound. She became more anxious, more guarded, and increasingly distrustful of others. As the years passed, the weight of her brother's death never lifted. It lingered, shaping her inner world and silently burdening her long after the tragedy itself had faded from public view. No matter where she went, the memory of Tom followed her. In college, Katharine Hepburn struggled to find her place. She was awkward, self-conscious, and often avoided the other girls, even refusing to join them in the dining hall. Yet her discomfort with fitting in was never meant to last. At her core, Hepburn was a born rebel. College awakened her appetite for risk and defiance. In one of her most daring moments, she stripped off her clothes and swam in Closter Pond, an act that perfectly captured her fearless spirit. She was later suspended during her second year for smoking in her dorm room, further cementing her reputation as a rule-breaker. Everything began to change when she joined the drama group. Hepburn soon landed the lead role in a campus production, one that required her to dress as a man. It was a look she embraced not only on stage, but off it as well, becoming part of her personal identity. Around this time, she entered a romance with Ludo Ogden Smith, a wealthy socialite and businessman who would later become her husband. But like many youthful love stories, they met at the wrong moment, and fate would eventually deal them a cruel blow. After experiencing theater in college, Hepburn knew with absolute certainty that acting was her calling. Her father, however, was far from convinced. To him, an acting career was closely tied to poverty and instability, and he could not imagine his daughter finding lasting success. Still, driven by stubborn determination, Hepburn pressed forward, determined to prove him wrong. What many don't realize is that Katharine Hepburn was not an overnight success. She began in theater, and her early days were marked by painful, humiliating setbacks. Critics mocked her sharp, piercing voice. Then, barely a month into her stage career, she was suddenly called in as an understudy to replace the lead actress on opening night. Unprepared and overwhelmed, Hepburn completely fell apart, arriving late and failing to rise to the moment. It was a brutal introduction to the world she so desperately wanted to conquer, and a reminder that her path to greatness would be anything but easy. Her early attempts on stage were nothing short of disastrous. She missed her cues, mangled her lines, and at one point even tripped over herself in front of the audience. The humiliation was swift, and she was fired soon after. Seeking comfort and stability, Hepburn turned to marriage, but after only a few weeks of playing the role of a devoted wife, she felt trapped. All she wanted was to escape and return to her career. Throughout their 6-year marriage, Hepburn leaned heavily on her husband's unwavering devotion. To his credit, Ludo Ogden Smith was a loving and supportive partner, standing by her both emotionally and financially. Yet his affection was never fully returned. In the end, Hepburn's heart belonged not to domestic life, but to the theater. Even with her determination, she struggled to hold on to acting jobs. No matter how hard she tried, theater companies continued to let her go. In 1931, she confronted playwright Philip Barry and asked why he refused to cast her in his play. His answer was brutally honest, and it cut deeply. Still, Katharine Hepburn was never one to wilt under rejection. Though the criticism shook her confidence, she refused to quit. And that persistence proved crucial. Just as her career seemed to be slipping away, she landed the role that would change everything. In 1932, she broke through in The Warrior's Husband, a Broadway production that finally brought her the glowing reviews she had long dreamed of. Like something out of a classic Hollywood fairy tale, a talent scout happened to be in the audience and couldn't take his eyes off the commanding lead. Almost overnight, Hepburn found herself at RKO Studios, auditioning for the screen. Being offered a role in A Bill of Divorcement was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but Hepburn surprised everyone by making a bold demand: $1,500 a week, an astonishing figure for an unknown actress. The studio took a huge gamble by casting her, but they would soon realize it was a risk worth taking. Even though it was her very first film role, Hepburn was about to prove she belonged on the silver screen. She appeared completely untouched by the pressure. Instead of shrinking under the weight of expectation, Katharine Hepburn flourished. When her debut finally reached the big screen, critics were stunned by her commanding presence and the film's raw strength. RKO quickly recognized what they had on their hands and signed her to a long-term contract. Just 2 years later, Hepburn won the first of what would become 4 Academy Awards, remarkably, without ever attending a single Oscar ceremony. Yet as her star rose, she soon discovered that Hollywood was far more than make-believe. Behind closed doors, the industry was tangled in secrets, ambition, and scandal, and before long, Hepburn found herself pulled into that world as well. Her move to Hollywood marked the quiet end of her failing marriage. It wasn't only her rapidly ascending career that drove the separation, but also a whirlwind affair she began with a married agent Leland Hayward. Surprisingly, the divorce itself unfolded without bitterness. Hepburn and her former husband remained friends for the rest of their lives. While entangled with Hayward, Hepburn also found herself drawn to another man, an infatuation she worked hard to keep hidden. According to controversial biographer Barbara Leeming, she soon caught the attention of director John Ford while working together on Mary of Scotland in 1936. Ford and Hepburn connected effortlessly, their bond growing with surprising ease. By the time filming ended, Ford was deeply in love with his tomboyish leading lady. So much so, in fact, that he considered divorcing his wife, Mary, to marry Hepburn. But the fantasy collapsed abruptly when his wife threatened to take their daughter, bringing the entire plan crashing down and leaving yet another complicated chapter in Hepburn's increasingly scandalous Hollywood life. According to John Ford's niece, Hepburn went so far as to try persuading Mary Ford herself, allegedly offering her $50,000 in hopes of freeing both Ford and his daughter. But Hepburn gravely underestimated Mary. Ford was infamous for heavy drinking, sometimes disappearing into multi-day binges, yet never in the middle of a production. That was why the phone call Hepburn received from producer Cliff Reed was so alarming. Ford had done the unthinkable. He had gone on a wild drinking spree while a film was actively being made. Hepburn rushed to Ford's home and found him alone, completely intoxicated and spiraling. Desperate to help, she tried to sober him up by forcing him to drink a mixture of whiskey and castor oil. Instead of helping, the concoction made him violently ill. Horrified, Hepburn became convinced she had nearly killed him. Even worse, she was forced to confront a painful truth. No matter how much she cared, she could not save Ford from his own self-destructive nature. As she waited helplessly for the man she couldn't rescue, trouble was brewing elsewhere. Her other lover, Leland Hayward, was growing increasingly impatient. After both he and Hepburn finalized their divorces, it seemed inevitable that they would finally marry. But Hepburn delivered a devastating blow. She refused his proposal. Rejecting a powerful figure like Hayward proved to be a dangerous move. Whether out of wounded pride, jealousy over her involvement with Ford, or both, Hayward swiftly turned cold. He had promised Hepburn a role in the Broadway play Stage Door, but after her rejection, he abruptly pulled it away. By 1936, the consequences of her personal choices were beginning to spill directly into her career, marking the start of one of the most difficult and humbling chapters of Katharine Hepburn's life. Her acting career soon took a troubling downward turn. Hepburn appeared in 4 consecutive box office failures, and as if that weren't enough, her sharp-edged personality began to sour the press against her. Fiercely private and often blunt, she despised interviews and flatly refused to sign autographs. It did little to win over the public. Before long, she had earned herself a cruel nickname, Catherine of Arrogance. Audiences who once celebrated her now began to turn away. The very traits that had propelled her to stardom, her individuality, her confidence, were suddenly being used against her. Her unconventional clothing and decidedly masculine attitude drew relentless criticism, and her image became a liability. Sensing her star was fading, Hepburn began to understand just how unforgiving Hollywood could be. When she learned that the epic film Gone with the Wind was in development, she set her sights on the role, hoping it might revive her career. Instead, she was dismissed in the most humiliating way. Producer David O. Selznick told her she wasn't sensual enough and lacked the sexual appeal the character required. Stung by the rejection, Hepburn briefly turned her back on Hollywood altogether, retreating from its sharp-tongued insults. That escape, however, led her directly into the arms of her next romantic entanglement. While touring with a stage production of Jane Eyre in January 1937, Hepburn received a dinner invitation from the infamous billionaire Howard Hughes. They had been introduced earlier through their mutual friend Cary Grant, and from that moment on, Hughes had been unable to get her out of his mind. When Hepburn arrived in Boston for a 2-week run of the play, Hughes swept her into a whirlwind of dates. Together, they were a striking pair, the daring millionaire aviator and the glamorous, unconventional actress, an unlikely romance that immediately captured attention and hinted at yet another dramatic chapter in Hepburn's life. Howard Hughes was far from a traditional Prince Charming, yet something about him seemed to steady Hepburn in a way no one else had. Secretly, though, she still longed for John Ford, hoping he would finally leave his wife, a hope that never came true. By May 1937, exhausted by waiting and emotional uncertainty, Hepburn made a bold move and moved in with Hughes. Life with him was intoxicating. Yachts, private airplanes, fame, and influence. Fresh off his record-breaking flight around the world, Hughes and Hepburn appeared unstoppable, soaring both literally and figuratively. But beneath the glamour, something essential was missing. No amount of wealth or power could manufacture genuine love. After his aviation triumph, Hughes accompanied Hepburn on a trip to visit her family in Fenwick. Midway through the journey, he shocked her by proposing marriage. Hepburn hesitated. Independence was sacred to her, and she refused to surrender it without certainty. She had one final test for Hughes. Before she could say yes, she needed to know whether he loved what mattered most to her, her family and her roots. When they arrived in Fenwick, the answer became painfully clear. Hughes disliked the visit from the start. Worse still, Hepburn's family sensed his disinterest immediately. He showed little warmth toward them, coming across as arrogant and detached. That was the breaking point. The relationship quietly collapsed, and Hughes returned to the West Coast without her. By the time Hepburn starred in Bringing Up Baby in 1938, her reputation had sunk even lower. She was branded box office poison, a devastating label for an actress already struggling to reclaim her footing. With Hollywood turning its back on her, Hepburn returned to the stage, touring in the Philadelphia Story. The play became a massive success, and this time, Hepburn held a secret advantage. Thanks to the generosity of a former lover, she controlled the film rights. As her stage performances reignited interest, Hollywood suddenly wanted back in. Hepburn seized the moment. She sold the rights to MGM, the most powerful studio in the industry, but on her own terms. Fierce and determined, she laid down strict conditions. This time, Katharine Hepburn was done asking for permission. She was ready to reclaim her throne, and she intended to control every move. She was determined not just to return, but to reclaim her place at the very top. Katharine Hepburn knew she had to be the star, yet she made a brilliant strategic move by surrounding herself with two towering legends, Cary Grant and James Stewart. The Philadelphia Story was carefully engineered to rehabilitate her image. Audiences needed to fall in love with her all over again, and Hepburn understood exactly how to make that happen. It was a calculated, intelligent gamble, and only an actress with her sharp instincts could have orchestrated such a comeback. When the film finally hit theaters, the payoff was enormous. The Philadelphia Story became a major hit, and just like that, Hepburn's career was resurrected. But she wasn't finished proving her power. Fearless and firmly in control, Hepburn moved straight into her next project, a romantic comedy fittingly titled Woman of the Year. Once again, she asserted her influence, selecting both the director, George Stevens, and her leading man, Spencer Tracy. What she couldn't have known was that meeting Tracy would change her life forever. Many believe Spencer Tracy was the great love of Katharine Hepburn's life, and Woman of the Year marked the beginning of a deeply intense and complicated relationship. Hepburn fell for Tracy almost instantly. He, however, was slower to return those feelings. Still, their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, charged, effortless, and filled with glances that spoke louder than dialogue. Audiences were captivated, and studios quickly began pairing them together again and again. Yet off-screen, their relationship was far more tangled than it appeared. Their connection was so natural, so intimate, that suspicions began to swirl. To protect the strict morality clauses written into their contracts, the studios worked tirelessly to bury the truth. But silence only fueled speculation. Nearly everyone in Hollywood knew what was really going on. Tracy was a married man. His affair with Hepburn deepened his Catholic guilt, which already weighed heavily on him. His faith haunted him, especially after his son was born deaf, a tragedy Tracy believed was divine punishment for his sins. As time passed, Tracy's inner demons grew stronger. He struggled with anxiety, depression, and addiction, and Hepburn, bound to him emotionally, endured it all alongside him. She understood that Tracy would never leave his wife. His religious devotion made that impossible. Though he distanced himself from his family and lived much of his life in rented rooms and hotels, their love could never exist in the open. It was a relationship doomed to secrecy. Hepburn later described Tracy as tortured, and loving him came at a cost. By the 1940s, she was devoting significant portions of her life to caring for him, helping him through sleepless nights and emotional breakdowns, quietly sacrificing parts of her own career for a man she knew she could never fully have. In many ways, Katharine Hepburn became a caretaker in Spencer Tracy's life, quietly managing the weight of his drinking and emotional struggles. She never hid the fact that she didn't want children, openly admitting that motherhood held no appeal for her. And yet, if there was ever a contradiction to her self-described selfishness, it was her unwavering devotion to Tracy. For decades, she stood by him. Professionally, Hepburn thrived. While many of her contemporaries faded with age, she achieved the near impossible, remaining relevant, respected, and in demand. She adapted gracefully, choosing roles that challenged her, even venturing into Shakespeare in the 1950s. The 1960s, however, tested her resilience. Spencer Tracy's health deteriorated rapidly, and Hepburn stepped away from acting for 5 full years to care for him. In 1967, they returned to the screen together one final time in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, their 9th film as a pair. The moment was triumphant and tragic all at once. Hepburn won her 2nd Academy Award for the role, but just 17 days after filming wrapped, on June 10, 1967, Tracy died. Hepburn was at his side. Out of respect for their lifelong secrecy, she did not attend his funeral. She would not publicly acknowledge the truth of their relationship until after Tracy's wife, Louise, passed away in 1983. Even then, the mysteries surrounding Hepburn never truly settled. Throughout her life, she endured relentless criticism for her boyish appearance, unconventional fashion, and assertive, masculine demeanor. She had little interest in marriage or children, prompting media speculation about her sexuality. Once linked to Spencer Tracy, those rumors expanded to include him as well. Some claimed their affair was merely a facade, that Hepburn was a lesbian, Tracy a gay man, and that his lifelong depression stemmed from repression. Similar debates surrounded her alleged relationship with John Ford. Yet no amount of speculation could erase the undeniable bond Hepburn and Tracy shared, one that endured religion, scandal, illness, and silence. Tracy's death left an immense void, but Hepburn grieved in her own way. Instead of retreating, she charged forward. Her performance as Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine in The Lion in Winter earned her a 3rd Oscar, though accolades mattered little to her by then. Fame never slipped from her grasp. As she aged, she softened slightly toward the press, revealing glimpses of her warmth and wit. In 1973, she charmed audiences during a rare, candid 2-hour interview with Dick Cavett. Still fiercely opinionated, she never diluted her beliefs. She openly supported birth control and abortion rights and, in an industry steeped in public displays of faith, unapologetically declared herself an atheist. That same year, fate brought her face-to-face once more with John Ford. His grandson, writing a book about the director, arranged a meeting and recorded their conversation. When he stepped away, the tape kept rolling. Unaware, Ford told Hepburn he loved her. She replied in kind. That private exchange, captured by accident, offered rare evidence of a deeper history long suspected. Ford died later that year. As Hepburn grew older, friends, lovers, and contemporaries slowly disappeared, but she endured. Even into her 80s, she remained fiercely active, playing tennis almost daily and discovering new passions like painting. Yet Hepburn still guarded secrets. After her brother Tom's death, her grief drove her to quietly change her birth year to match his, making herself 2 years older. She maintained the lie for decades, only confessing the truth in her autobiography in 1993. Not long after, her health began to fail. Hospitalized for exhaustion, she slowly declined. Pneumonia struck brutally, dementia followed, and in 2003, Katharine Hepburn died of cardiac arrest at the age of 96. There was, at least, one final comfort. She passed away in the place she loved most, her family home in Fenwick, Connecticut. A legend, a rebel, a mystery to the very end.